So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've got about 30 clips on several different topics for what I think should be an interesting show tonight. As always, this is my weekly broadcast of the best clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, along with a little political comedy and along with my commentary between the clips. Although NBC didn't broadcast Meet the Press this week, I'll be using clips from the Sunday morning news shows on the other four of the regular five outlets other than NBC, meaning ABC, CBS, and CNN and Fox News. Plus, I'll use some quasi-news clips from last night's Saturday Night Live on NBC and Friday's Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO. The topics I'll be covering tonight include the kidnapping of those Nigerian schoolgirls by Boko Haram, a few clips on NSA Spying, some clips on 2016 presidential politics featuring Elizabeth Warren and Marco Rubio from the United States Senate. And I'll even be doing a few clips on Benghazi, as I've listed down in the video description, showing all the topics, which also shows I want to start off with the continuing crisis in Ukraine and Russia for another week. It's been a continuing issue. And it was covered on all the Sunday morning shows this morning, and it was also covered last night on Saturday Night Live, where the Weekend Update anchor Colin Jost covered Vladimir Putin's visit to Crimea last week like this.
While Western leaders were debating further sanctions for Russia for annexing Crimea, Vladimir Putin this week attended a Russian military celebration in Crimea. Putin made the trip after asking himself, as always, what would King Joffrey do?
I wanted to include that clip for all of my viewers who are also Game of Thrones fans. I'm a Game of Thrones fan, and I know my show conflicts with Game of Thrones for some of you, although you can watch my show as a recorded show if you watch Game of Thrones, or you can record Game of Thrones like I do and watch it later. But I won't give away any of the plot developments having to do with King Joffrey recently for those who may be catching up. But I thought that was an interesting analogy between Vladimir Putin and King Joffrey, but I think Vladimir Putin has done more to increase his personal approval ratings than King Joffrey ever did, and I'm going to show a quick report from ABC's Terry Moran on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, reporting on what Vladimir Putin's been doing in Russia and kind of the political effects of it all over here.
Alex, we've seen a dramatic shift in tone from President Putin about those separatists in eastern Ukraine. He's keeping them at arm's length and now calling for dialogue among all Ukrainians. Of course, he also said he was pulling back the 40,000 Russian troops on the Ukrainian border, but U.S. and NATO officials say they still haven't seen that. Right now, Putin is riding sky high politically. There was that dramatic, defiant victory lap in Crimea on Friday. Last night, he even hit the ice in an exhibition hockey game, and he scored 6 goals. From the start of this crisis, Putin has kept everyone guessing, including the Russian people, applying pressure, backing off as needed. But one thing is for certain. Putin is determined to maintain maximum Russian influence in Ukraine and block it from joining the West, and he will use today's referendum as he sees fit to achieve that goal.
So, yeah, I'm not so sure about today's referendum, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show a few more clips. But I really was amused by that clip of Vladimir Putin taking to the ice in that exhibition hockey game. I wonder if the defense and the goalie were really playing their best, or if those 6 goals show that they let up a little on the dictator or the near dictator of the Russian Federation. I don't know. Maybe down in the comments you can let me know. I'll check out the comments when I get to the end of the clips and get a little live discussion going. But first, I want to show actually a clip from Republican Mike Rogers was over on Face the Nation, and he talked about what's going on in Ukraine a little bit, and he specifically talked about this conflict between what Vladimir Putin said last week, that he's withdrawing troops from the border with Ukraine, and what Americans have said that they don't see any evidence of that. And so here is, Mike Rogers is the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, so he should have some insight into the question. So I'll discuss that a little more after I show the clip here.
We've really seen, Bob, is that they're pulling troops out, but for the sole purpose of rotating out their conscripts. They have 2-year conscription there in Russia. Those 2 years are up for a lot of those forces along the border, so they're really rotating them out. I would not read that he is wholesale pulling his troops back. This is a function of making sure he has fresh conscripts up along the border.
So yeah, there is Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers, saying that he doesn't believe that there's really any troop withdrawal. It's just a rotation of troops. And over on ABC's This Week, the actual Secretary of Defense from the Obama administration, former Republican Senator Chuck Hagel, was on, and Martha Raddatz asked him the same question about the withdrawals, and he pretty much said there were no withdrawals. And then he also gave sort of a further analysis of what Vladimir Putin is doing over in this clip.
Well, they're not leaving, as far as we can tell. You'd have to ask President Putin as to why he says they're leaving and when, in fact, they're not.
Should Russia be considered an enemy?
Well, it's easy to categorize an enemy. We're not at war with Russia. So do you define an enemy as being at war or not at war?
Adversary?
Obviously, an adversary in Ukraine, sure. But I think that's a little simplistic to get into to either enemy, friend, partner, so on. Russia continues to isolate itself for a short-term gain. The Russians may feel that somehow they're winning, but the world is not about just short-term.
One of the
So yeah, there is Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel saying that he doesn't see the troops leaving from the border with Ukraine, just like Mike Rogers said. And he also says that while Putin may be getting some short-term gain out of this, it's not just about the short term. And also on the issue of Ukraine, they did do a little bit of coverage of that over on Fox News Sunday, although as I'll show in a minute, they did very little Ukraine coverage and spent a lot of time on Benghazi. Although Benghazi was not the lead story, they actually led with the Nigerian schoolgirls kidnapped by Boko Haram, and I'll show a few clips on that also in a minute. But first I want to show the report. This is pretty much the only reporting on Ukraine, or very little coverage of Ukraine on Fox News Sunday, because I guess of all the time they spent on Benghazi. But here's the report of Jennifer Griffin on what's going on in the elections in eastern Ukraine, this referendum that separatists have put together, and how that's going to turn out over in this clip.
Bob, well, we've been to quite a few polling stations this morning, and there are some long lines out there. Everybody who we saw, with the exception of one young woman, appeared to be voting yes for independence. But let's be clear, this vote does not meet any international standards. We visited polling stations where there were no booths, where people were simply voting out in the open at a large desk. We saw one older woman who voted twice because she panicked that she accidentally voted no the first time round, and one young man who was allowed to vote in a polling station where he wasn't actually registered. And then, of course, there are the many people here who don't support the pro-Russian separatist movement. They are not even voting in today's referenda because, like the government of Ukraine and of the U.S. and much of the international community, they view this vote as being illegal and illegitimate.
Excuse me. Obviously, that was not Fox News Sunday. That was CBS's Face the Nation, Clarissa Ward, giving a similar report to what I'll show from Fox News Sunday in a minute about the election irregularities and how there's basically no way to verify that the accuracy of this vote. The people who would be voting no are boycotting the vote, and there's no real privacy. And before I get to the Fox News Sunday report on it, I also want to show, here's a report on ABC. This is Alex Marquardt giving basically the similar story of what's going on in the elections today in eastern Ukraine here.
Good morning, Martha. People have been streaming all day into polling stations like this one to cast their votes in this hastily arranged referendum. This is the ballot. It asks a rather ambiguous question about more independence for this region. Every voter we've spoken with, every ballot we've seen says yes, this vote will pass overwhelmingly. But there are no official monitors. They don't even have the latest voter registration rolls and no real way to make sure voters don't vote more than once. And it's hard to say in concrete terms what this vote will mean beyond deepening divisions in this country. Anger is on the rise here, particularly following several violent and deadly incidents in which pro-Russian protesters were killed. Today's referendum is happening despite calls from Russian President Vladimir Putin to delay it. And for more from the Russian side, we go to my colleague Terry Moran.
Of course, I already showed that Terry Moran clip, and the next clip I want to show is actually the Fox News Sunday coverage of what was going on in Ukraine. It's from Greg Palkot, who it's kind of gives me a little nostalgia because the very first LiberalViewer video I ever made, I think was called Fox News Tries to Make Some News in Lebanon, involved a report from Greg Palkot. But this is the very little coverage that Ukraine got on Fox News Sunday because they spent all that time on Benghazi, which I'll get to later. But here is the basically, except for a little discussion on the roundtable, here's the only news reporting on what's going on in Ukraine on Fox News Sunday from their reporter Greg Palkot in eastern Ukraine here.
Chris, voting is continuing in this controversial referendum here in eastern Ukraine. Local officials tell us that the turnout is colossal. Kiev and the State Department is branding the vote illegal. Here's a little bit of what we saw.
The ballots for this referendum vote on self-rule in the region are marked in private over there and then brought over to these transparent ballot boxes where we can get an early unofficial exit poll. The does or yes have it.
In fact, there are a lot of irregular aspects to this poll based on old electoral rolls. If you're not on the list, you can vote anyway. Besides, there are no international observers around. Plus, the wording on the ballot is vague. Yes can mean anything from greater autonomy to breaking away from Kiev to joining up with Russia. Those not agreeing seem to be staying away. Those showing up were pretty vocal with us. All this done, of course, in an atmosphere of violence. Security at the poll stations was visible, and it was pretty heavy-handed nearby. Government buildings remain occupied by those pro-Russian militants. While the day went mostly peacefully, there were clashes reported between Ukrainian military and rebels, and there were some threats at polling stations. We should expect the first results from this vote later tonight, and then we'll look for reaction, especially from Russia. Vladimir Putin has been keeping a pretty careful distance from this vote in the last couple of days. Chris.
So yeah, that was the Fox News report on Ukraine, which was basically the only coverage they gave on Fox News. And you can see they pretty much said the same thing on all the three networks that I showed reports from there on CBS, ABC, and Fox News. They all said that there were irregularities in the voting, that it wasn't private, that people could vote more than once, and that the people who were against the referendum were not voting. Also that the referendum itself is kind of ambiguous. So there were a lot of things in all three of those reports that made me think that the results of today's referendum are going to be kind of questionable anyway. But after pointing out there that Fox News Sunday did almost no reporting on Ukraine, just that one report I showed you, because they spent so much time on Benghazi, I would at least like to give Fox News credit for having not Benghazi as their lead story. The lead story on Fox News Sunday this morning was actually the kidnapped girls in Nigeria, the schoolgirls, almost 300 of them, who were kidnapped by Boko Haram. And I want to start off with the report from Fox News reporter Jennifer Griffin, talking about what's going on with the kidnapped girls, and then I'll talk about that a little more after I show the clip here.
Unarmed U.S. military personnel are now on the ground in Nigeria, part of a group of 16 U.S. personnel. They've been sent to try to pinpoint where the kidnapped schoolgirls are being held by the Islamic fighters known as Boko Haram. There are rising demands that the U.S. and others do more to help the mothers and families of these young girls. And now the Pentagon is discussing the possibility of moving surveillance and reconnaissance assets toward Nigeria, possibly drones. A senior U.S. official tells me they are waiting for Nigeria to formally make the request. However, there is still no talk of sending armed U.S. troops to assist the search. Outrage ensued 3 weeks after the kidnapping when this video appeared this week from the leader of Boko Haram laughing as he boasted about converting the Christian girls in the group to Islam, threatening to sell the girls into slavery. The U.S. placed a $7 million bounty on him last year and in November designated Boko Haram a foreign terror organization after the State Department resisted requests to do so for several years. The group's name means Western education is a sin. The First Lady tweeted this picture demanding the girls return. The Nigerian president, who did not speak publicly about the kidnapped girls or call for a security meeting to mount a search for more than 2 weeks, finally spoke.
I will not sleep with my 2 eyes closed until these girls are brought safely back to their parents.
Perhaps the most explosive revelation since the kidnapping on April 15th is that the Nigerian military was warned 4 hours before it occurred and did not use its security forces to try to stop it. Chris?
So that's the report from Jennifer Griffin. And one reason I thought that Fox News might have led with the Boko Haram kidnapping story is, you notice in the middle there, she talked about how the State Department had resisted years ago designating Boko Haram as a terrorist organization. Well, that was, of course, the State Department run by Hillary Clinton. And I have heard Republicans, and even I've heard stories on Fox News. I think there was this Fox and Friends story where they basically said the kidnapped girls in Nigeria were the fault of Hillary Clinton because she was the head of the State Department that didn't designate Boko Haram as a terrorist organization a couple years ago, although they're designated as such now. And if you think that may be why Fox News Sunday led with the Boko Haram story, I have to at least give Fox News Sunday credit for having on a former Republican ambassador to Nigeria to basically refute or rebut or contradict that argument. And I will talk about that a little more after I show that clip here.
Ambassador Campbell, Secretary Clinton has come under fire this week because of the fact that back in 2011 she rejected calls by the FBI and the intelligence community to designate Boko Haram as a foreign terrorist organization. As a Bush appointee to be ambassador, do you think that's fair, the criticism of Secretary Clinton?
No, I don't think it's fair. And along with a good many other Nigerian experts at the time, we all opposed designation. We oppose designation because we don't think that the legislation actually fits the situation in Nigeria. The Boko Haram movement is highly diffuse. It's not a centralized organization. It has important grassroots elements to it. The legislation has to do essentially with issues like getting visas to come to the U.S., or the movement of money from the U.S. to Nigeria, neither of which is relevant. What the legislation also does, however, is that it inhibits the possibility of future contact between either private citizens or public personalities with Boko Haram, and at some future point, that might reduce the options that we have in terms of negotiation.
So yeah, that was interesting, seeing someone on a Fox News program defending Hillary Clinton against the charge that she's responsible for the kidnapping of the Nigerian schoolgirls because her State Department didn't designate Boko Haram as a terrorist organization back in, 2010, 2011. But those reasons are fairly legitimate reasons, from what I understand, and I guess the reason that Republican is defending Hillary Clinton is because he's on the record back at the time as saying that it wasn't a good idea to designate them as a terrorist organization. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I also want to show over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, Martha Raddatz was the host in for George Stephanopoulos, and she actually introduced a report from Hamish MacDonald, also talking about what's going on in Nigeria, and he also reported that story about how Nigerian security forces, there have been these allegations that they had warning that they ignored that this kidnapping was going to occur. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show the clip here.
This morning, Nigeria's government is facing damning allegations that security forces knew 4 hours before the attack that Boko Haram was coming.
This for us is shocking and it's embarrassing, and it's kind of shows that there's an apparent lack of political will.
The claims are made in an Amnesty International investigation, but the Defence Ministry here says the report is unfortunate and untrue. We do know Nigeria's government took time before accepting international help. There are now 24 US personnel on the ground, including the military in a support role only. But the surveillance and reconnaissance assets heading to Nigeria now could help immensely in the search. That may include aircraft capable not only of visual surveillance, but those which could pick up cell phone conversations in real time. The CIA Director, John Brennan, has indicated to Jorge Ramos on our sister network, Fusion, there is scope to do more.
We have officers on the ground in many parts of the world, and so we're able to bring to bear the capabilities that we need, the people that we need.
Support for the girls is spreading globally, from the Pope on Twitter to the First Lady.
In these girls, Barack and I see our own daughters.
The question now is whether all of this international support will actually make it easier or harder for the families to get their girls back safely. There is a perceived risk here that pressure from outside could force Nigeria's president to take a more hardline approach, and that could endanger the girls. For This Week, Hamish.
Yeah, so that was Hamish MacDonald on This Week with George Stephanopoulos giving that same report, also talking about this big hashtag campaign, which I'll get to in a minute. But first I want to show a clip over on the last Fox News Sunday clip on the whole Nigerian schoolgirl kidnapping issue. They actually, I think the reason maybe that they led with Boko Haram and the kidnapping of the Nigerian schoolgirls is because it plays into the talking point they're doing with Benghazi about how Al Jazeera and Islamists are spreading across North Africa. And they actually had one of the leaders of the Malala Foundation over on Fox News Sunday, and let me make sure I got her name right. Her name is Shiza Shahid, and they tried to get her to talk about how bad Islamists are for women, which of course they are. But one of the things I thought was interesting in her answer is that she talked about how one of the reasons that Islamists are so bad is because they're against liberal progressive thought, which isn't the kind of words you that they want to hear on Fox News, but I'll talk about that a little more after I show that clip here.
Chris, it's unfortunately a tactic that we've seen deployed by extreme groups again and again as a means of intimidation, of control, of terrorizing families, of terrorizing entire populations. And it really stems from the wider ideology of groups like Boko Haram and the Taliban, which attacked Malala, of course. That is fear of progress, fear of liberal and progressive thinking, and fear of women in particular being empowered. In the Swat Valley, we saw this as a gradual progression where first children were asked to be segregated, then they demanded some changes in the curriculum, and then moved towards actual destruction of schools. And in Nigeria, it's been an even swifter and more horrifying attack with the kidnapping of almost 300 schoolgirls.
So I'm sure on Fox News and Fox News Sunday, they were happy to hear that negative assessment of Islamists, but the idea that the best way to fight them, or the major foe of Islamists, is liberal progressive thought. I don't know if that was what they were expecting or hoping to hear on Fox News Sunday. And I want to also show a clip from CNN's State of the Union. They have a reporter in Nigeria who actually talked to a Nigerian schoolgirl who escaped from Boko Haram when they came with like 7 trucks and kidnapped a whole bunch of other girls. And this is sort of an extended interview. It's from the, you only see the Nigerian schoolgirl from the back, and she's anonymous, and you can see by the end that she's afraid of really saying anything about the kidnappers. And the CNN reporter, her name is Nima Elbager, if I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and I'll discuss that a little more after I show the clip here.
He said, go enter this car.
What kind of cars?
A big lorry.
Was it one or more?
7.
7 lorries?
Yes.
And this was at 10 o'clock at night?
In the night.
So did that make you feel that they had come to get you, to get the girls?
Yes.
That's when you knew that they'd come to kidnap you?
Yeah. He said, okay, we enter this lorry. We go. So I said, I will drop down.
That was really brave of you.
Yes, we are driver. We ran in the bush.
You ran in the bush?
Yes.
And what happened then?
We are we gone.
Can you describe the men that came and took you? What did they look like? Were they wearing civilian clothing or military uniforms? What were they wearing?
I don't know this one.
But what was their dress? What were they wearing?
I feel afraid.
Did they look like soldiers?
Yes, we are a little afraid.
You feel afraid?
Yes.
You don't want to talk about what they look like?
No.
It's okay. I understand. I'm sorry.
So that was kind of a poignant interview there. And that's the closest I've seen in the media to an eyewitness account of this whole kidnapping of the Nigerian schoolgirls. And so I wanted to show you that. And I think it's that kind of personal, heart-rending side of the story that's been responsible for this whole social media campaign and the hashtag campaign, Bring Our Girls Back, that I think in some of the previous clips I showed Ellen DeGeneres and First Lady Michelle Obama and a whole bunch of celebrities were engaging in this social media activism, and there is some evidence that it's put pressure on the Nigerian government to accept outside help, but that didn't stop Bill Maher over on HBO's Real Time last Sunday from making fun of the whole hashtag campaign, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show that clip here.
Now, this is a bad group of motherfuckers. I mean, they have gotten... They are. They've got machetes and AK-47s and rocket launchers, but we have got Facebook and Tumblr. If they do anything to those hostages, we're going to tag them in party pictures where they look like shit. So, don't mess with us.
So that may seem like a joke or to make fun of the social media campaign, especially because it seems to have had some effect. But, of course, there actually were people who were criticizing that hashtag social media campaign on the Nigerian schoolgirls, and one of those was Republican Mike Rogers over on Face the Nation, and he was talking about what's going on in Boko Haram, or in Nigeria with Boko Haram, and he definitely put it into this argument about the general weakness of the Obama administration, and somewhere in the middle of his answer you'll see him talk about sort of in a mocking way about hashtag activism and selfies over in this clip.
Well, it looks as if there's a hostage negotiator and then some military advisors. But here's the point on this, Bob, and if we look at this, this was a problem in 2010 when Boko Haram said that they wanted to be part of al-Qaeda. That's where the problem started. And so this policy, this new ecosystem of terrorism that's all the way from Nigeria, all the way across northern Africa to AQAP in Yemen, all the way over to Pakistan and Afghanistan, you can't base your policy on what's trending on Twitter. It has to be more than hashtags and selfies. This is a huge and growing problem that's really been relatively ignored. I just got back from Chad. Chad has been screaming for help from the United States for 2 years. On one front, Boko Haram. On the north, they have Al-Qaeda, and in their southeast, they have Al-Shabaab. And they're fighting to try to push all of that back. Candidly, not a lot of help from the United States. Can we help with the girls? I think we can, and we should, and we must. But we also have to worry about the women of Afghanistan, some 11 million. We're getting ready to walk away from them. In Syria, you have 12 million women who are under siege, some 150,000 Syrians. Last week, a school was bombed, 25 kids killed. This is going to continue to happen unless we have a robust, holistic approach to what is radicalism and extremism popping up all around the world.
So, of course, since Mike Rogers is a Republican there, he is segueing any talk about any foreign policy issue into this general idea about the weakness of the Obama administration. And Obama Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, who used to be a Republican senator, Mike Rogers is actually a Republican congressman, but Chuck Hagel was a Republican senator before he became Secretary of Defense. And he was over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos talking to Martha Raddatz, as I showed earlier. And he actually addressed this idea about American weakness. He was talking about Boko, Nigeria and Boko Haram, and I think he was talking about Ukraine, both of them, in previous answers. And he actually admitted that there is some perception of American weakness, and that he just thinks that it's an inaccurate perception, which I'll talk a little more about after I show that clip here.
When I travel overseas, people say different things about America. They say it's not as forceful. Have you not seen that?
I have seen some of it, yes. Yes, and I think that's the kind of reality that's out there. We are still the dominant power. I mean, no one's in our universe, whether you apply a metric or measurement of economic power, military power. But that doesn't mean we can solve every problem alone. No nation can do that. I do think there is a sense out there that you have correctly identified by some, that somehow America's power is eroding, or we're not going to use our power, or we're too timid about our power. I don't believe that. I think we have been wise on how we use our power.
So, yeah, I think it is a little bit surprising to see a sitting Secretary of Defense admit, even to any extent, that America is seen as weak some places. I don't know if that's because Chuck Hagel tends to be, he has this reputation as being a straight talker, kind of in like John McCain used to be seen as a straight talker before he ran for president, or if it's because he used to be a Republican, but that's more than I would expect from a defense secretary in terms of that admission. And he also talked, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel also talked a little bit more about what the United States can do in Nigeria to stop this kidnapping of the schoolgirls, and I'll talk a little bit more about that after I show that clip here.
Give us a reality check. How hard is it going to be to find these girls?
It's going to be very difficult. It's a vast country, so this is not going to be an easy task. But we're going to bring to bear every asset we can possibly use to help the Nigerian government.
I know one of the things people keep saying is, why wouldn't U.S. special operators go in and try to find the girls?
Yeah, well, I think you look at everything, but there's no intention at this point to be putting any American boots on the ground.
So, yeah, no American boots on the ground from Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel, but they do have those advisors, and they've talked about using drones. I showed that in a previous report. And before I leave the issue of the kidnapped Nigerian schoolgirls and Boko Haram, I want to show one more clip from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher last Friday, where he had on this comedian, and I think he was former digital director for The Onion, and now has this other sort of like comedy news website, and his name is Bartunde Thurston. He argued with Bill Maher about this whole Islamist issue, whether there was something inherently wrong with Islam, and it ended up with a comment from conservative Dinesh D'Souza about how much terrorism Islam is responsible for, and I will talk about that a little more after I show that clip here.
I don't think Islam has any monopoly on darkness and nutbags and crazy rhetoric and violence.
Kind of they do.
No, they really don't have a monopoly.
Not a monopoly, but perspective is important.
Okay.
It's not a monopoly, but it's the Titanic hitting the iceberg compared to Whitney Houston dying in her bathtub.
So let's look at how long we've had people running around making excuses to hurt other people. And Islam is a part of that tradition, but so has Christianity been.
But that's,
slavery was defended
if this was
strongly.
the 14th century, I would be coming down on the Christians because that's when they were too violent.
You wouldn't have television, so you couldn't.
Or the 18th,
Okay,
but
you're right
that's
about
the
this,
point, is that religions and cultures change. In the 14th century, it was the Christians, but this isn't the 14th century.
But this is an important distinction you're making because there sometimes is a broad indictment of religion in general. But if you look today, you do see that while the vast majority of Muslims are by no means terrorists, it does seem that the vast majority of terrorist incidents do involve some aspect of the Muslim world. You don't see a whole lot of Buddhist suicide bombers. I'm still waiting for the Koreans to show up.
And also that they drove...
Now, what Dinesh D'Souza there said is totally untrue, and I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have. And unfortunately for people watching the live show, I haven't had time to put the links in the video description, but by the time this is a recorded show, I should have the link showing both in the United States and in Europe that Muslims account for a very small percentage of terrorist incidents. In Europe especially, I remember there was a report, it's mostly like separatists, like Basque separatists and a whole bunch of other groups. Any time period you choose, almost there is a few high-profile Muslim terrorist incidents in the last decade. But if you actually look at all the terrorist incidents, Muslims make up a small percentage of the responsibility for those incidents. So that is not accurate. And so that was the last clip on the whole Boko Haram kidnapping of Nigerian schoolgirls issue that I wanted to show, though I was glad to see it got a lot more coverage this week than it did last week, where I just showed that one clip at the end of the show. And I think one of the reasons for that is this social media campaign that Bill Maher was making fun of. And speaking of online activity, I want to do a few quick clips on NSA Spying, because over on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, they had this report from they had this report on NSA spying, and first they had an interview. Pierre Thomas was the reporter who I think I have that right, and he interviewed first Keith Alexander, who was director of the NSA at the time that Snowden worked there, and Pierre Thomas asked Keith Alexander if Edward Snowden was a spy, and he didn't have any more evidence than, I showed Mike Rogers. He was one of the ones who famously spread this smear that Edward Snowden is a Russian spy, but the only evidence he has is that he's in Russia, and now he must be under Russian influence, and when that influence began, we don't know. And you can see, here's Keith Alexander basically trying to smear Edward Snowden with that same talking point about influence over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, talking to their reporter here.
And undercover assets all around the world.
Is he a spy? I don't know the answer to that. I am concerned that where he is now, he is at least influenced by Russia. The real question, and we don't know an answer to, is how far back did that go?
So yeah, that's that same smear tactic that the only evidence they give that Edward Snowden is a Russian spy is that he's in Russia, so he must be under the influence of Russia, and we don't know how far back that influence goes, and so that's basically no evidence whatsoever. And Edward Snowden obviously did a lot of good, and for the American people in revealing NSA spying programs we had no idea existed. And I was glad to see that ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, in that report with reporter Pierre Thomas, one of the very brief clips they showed was from the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union, Anthony Romero, making exactly that point, as you can see over in this clip.
They say for the better.
We have the courts engaging the legality and the wisdom of these programs. We have the Congress conducting oversight. Yet that debate would never have happened but for the actions of Edward Snowden.
So yeah, I think that is definitely true. And one of the clips, the last clip on NSA Spying I want to show you comes from former counterterrorism expert formerly in both the Bush administration and the Clinton administration, Richard Clarke, who I actually saw speak at an ACLU conference back, I don't know, like in 2003, something like that. I can't remember the exact year, but I really thought he was very reasonable on the issue of terrorism and on civil liberties and on the overreach of the Bush administration and the wrong focus on, ways to catch terrorists. And but he did say some negative things about Edward Snowden. He echoed what Anthony Romero said there about helping with this debate as a small silver lining, but he actually seemed to think that Edward Snowden really hurt our counterterrorism ability, and I'll talk about that briefly after I show that final NSA spying clip here.
How he did that, or the effect, rather.
Well, he may or may not have intended, we don't know. But he revealed ways that NSA collects information. And the terrorists and others, criminals and others around the world, have stopped using those methods of communication since he revealed them. And so we no longer have the heads up that an attack is coming on our embassy and fill in the blank because of what he did. Sure, he revealed a program, the telephony program, the 215 program, that was a stupid program that we might not have known about otherwise. And I'm glad we know about it.
So if there's a silver lining, that's it.
But it's a pretty small silver lining. I'm glad we know about the program. We're killing the program because it was unnecessary and overly intrusive, and it didn't have enough oversight by the courts. And so the president is killing the program. That's what we recommended.
I want to...
So yeah, there is Richard Clarke, former official of both the Bush and Clinton administrations, who was responsible for counterterrorism and stopping Al-Qaeda, and who at a speech I saw him give was very critical of the Bush administration's failure to stop the September 11th attack, and also critical of the overreach of NSA spying, basically, that on the American people. But you can see Richard Clarke there is actually critical of Edward Snowden and the negative effect he's had on our counterterrorism ability. And I take that comment from Richard Clarke more seriously than I do from a lot of the Republicans and even the pro-NSA Democrats like Dianne Feinstein, who I've shown clips from in the past, who said that Edward Snowden had hurt American national security. Those I didn't give as much credence to, but that Richard Clarke one, I'm not so sure about, because I respect what he said about on other issues in the past. So I actually give some credence to that. But I'd be interested to know what you think. So let me know down in the comment section, whether you're watching live or as a recorded show. If you're watching live, hopefully I'll have a chance to get to your comment before I stop the broadcast. But I also want to cover the issue of Benghazi briefly. So this last week, there was the Republicans voted to start this select committee to investigate Benghazi, and a select committee is basically a special committee for that purpose. It's not one of the standing committees, and so they're going to appoint 7 Republicans to investigate the whole so-called scandal with Benghazi, and there are going to be 5 spots for Democrats, and the Democrats haven't decided whether they're going to actually participate or whether they're going to boycott the select committee, because there have already been so many investigations. And of course, this was a big issue over on Fox News Sunday, where they had the chair of the new committee, Trey Gowdy, and they also had a Democrat. None of the Democrats have been appointed to the committee yet, but this is the head of the Democratic Caucus, I think is his title. He's Xavier Becerra. He's a California Democratic congressman, and he talked about why he's worried that it might be a kangaroo court, especially with all the previous investigations. But then he didn't do as well answering Chris Wallace's cross-examination at the end that I'll talk about a little more after I show that clip here.
Well, what leads us to believe it could be a kangaroo court or a smokescreen from having to deal with the real issues Americans want us to deal with, like job creation and so forth, is that we've done these investigations some 7 times. 5 of the investigations coming out of 5 of the House Republican committees. And so we've done this over 18 months. We've spent millions of dollars. And we've seen what happens when you have a show trial.
Well,
so we're trying to avoid that.
Let me ask you a question. Do you believe that all the questions about Benghazi have been answered?
I have not heard any new questions raised that have not been answered.
Well, let me ask you a question, and maybe you can answer it for me. Where was the president, and what did he do the night of the attack?
I believe the president was at the White House, and he was in communication with some of the folks in his administration in and around the time of the attacks.
So yeah, I thought Xavier Becerra, congressman from California, Democrat there, his answer started out strong, but I didn't think his answer at the end there was all that strong. And you can see Chris Wallace kind of capitalized on that by bringing in the Republican chair of this new select committee, Trey Gowdy, to follow up on the cross-examination that he seemed to have gotten a little traction on there with Xavier Becerra. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show that clip here.
Do you know, Congressman Gowdy, where the president was and what he was doing during the 7 hours of the attack?
No, sir, I do not, nor do I know what communication, if any, he had with Secretary of State Clinton, nor can I tell you why we were still in Benghazi, despite the fact that there was an escalation of violence in the months leading up, nor do I know whether or not the president called any of our allies in the region and said, can you get any assets to Benghazi? We're under attack. I have more questions than answers, despite the fact that committees of Congress have looked at this attack for 19 months now.
Congressman Becerra, can you answer the specific questions that you just heard from Congressman Gowdy?
Sure. And by the way, I also want to say Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. But Trey, you served on one of these committees that did this investigation. You're a great prosecutor. You should have asked those questions, or you could have asked those questions. I bet you did ask those questions. And so the issue, Chris, is are we going over and over and go over, and now are we setting up a process that's not only going to be a fair, balanced, or open approach to this, but also is appearing to be a smokescreen so they can raise campaign funds? Because right now we know the Republicans are raising campaign funds off of this Benghazi investigation that they're calling for. And so it's very distressing.
We're going to get to the campaign funds.
So yeah, you can see Chris Wallace quickly cut off Representative Xavier Becerra there when he started getting to the way the Republicans are politicizing this, and he actually waited till the very end of the segment to ask Trey Gowdy, Congressman Trey Gowdy, to talk about the politicization, and gave him lots of time to give a long answer trying to refute that, talking about how fair he was and how he wouldn't use it to fundraise on, and then he attacked Democrats for fundraising on all sorts of issues. I can't even remember how far back he went, but I'm not going to show that clip, but I just wanted to talk about it. But I also didn't think that Xavier Becerra's answer there was very strong, because he didn't really have answers for Chris Wallace's questions, even though I think there are some answers to them. But what is a more pressing issue in the news from this last week and probably in this coming week is whether Democrats are going to actually participate in this select committee or boycott it. And I thought Chris Wallace did at least a good job of presenting Xavier Becerra with what the current demands are from the Democrats, and asking him if he supports those demands. That basically he quotes the minority leader of the House, Democratic Congressperson Nancy Pelosi, and what she's demanding to have Democrats participate in this Benghazi committee. And here's how Xavier Becerra responded to that over in this clip.
Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi was making some demands this week. Let's put them up on the screen. Democrats must sign off on subpoenas. They must be allowed to participate in witness interviews, and Republicans must not selectively release testimony. Congressman Becerra, I have a simple question. Are you saying that if you get satisfactory answers to those, the Democrats will participate, and if you don't, that you won't?
We've participated in all the other 7 investigations. If it's a fair, open, and balanced process, absolutely. But we don't want to see reckless, irresponsible handling of an affair that took the lives of 4 brave Americans.
So wait, I just want to say, you're saying that if you are satisfied with the ground rules, you're declaring that the Democrats will appoint members to this committee?
I believe so. We've always said that we're ready to participate. We have an oversight responsibility in Congress. What we don't want to see is reckless and irresponsible use of Congress and taxpayer money to do these witch hunts.
So that is kind of what the issues are as to whether Democrats are going to boycott this select committee on Benghazi or participate in it. And I wasn't really that impressed with the performance of Xavier Becerra over on Fox News Sunday, but I did think that Democratic Congressperson Debbie Wasserman Schultz did a better job over on CNN's State of the Union, where she appeared with Republican Congressperson Michelle Bachmann, and I'm going to show Debbie Wasserman Schultz's answer that's sort of interrupted at the end by Michelle Bachmann, and I'll talk about that a little more after I show the clip here.
Questions answered to you?
Candy, I think what's important to note here that keeps getting either put aside or lacks focus is that there are families who have been through a really terrible tragedy, and the Republicans in the House of Representatives, after 13 hearings, 50 briefings, 25,000 pages of documents that have been released, and a commission that was put together by Secretary Clinton that has fully examined what happened and put forward 29 recommendations, all of which are being implemented. Those things have all occurred. This has been looked at so exhaustively that Buck McKeon, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, just last week criticized Darrell Issa, the Republican chairman of the Government Oversight Committee, because the last witness, a brigadier general that he brought before the committee to yet again investigate Benghazi, brought nothing new forward. This is in the words of their Republican Armed Services chairman. So just a minute. So the bottom line here is that the Republicans have clearly lost the ability, because we've had such a precipitous drop among Republicans even in their fervor for repealing the Affordable Care Act. They are clearly doing this to drive their turnout and gin up their base.
That is not true at all.
Michelle, I didn't interrupt you. Excuse me. Michelle, I didn't interrupt you, so I appreciate if you not interrupt me.
It actually got worse on CNN's State of the Union there between Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Michelle Bachmann. And I didn't show Michelle Bachmann's first answer, but I will show one more answer that Michelle Bachmann gave on the whole Benghazi issue, where she blamed Democrats for sabotaging the whole investigation. And I just wanted to make this the last Benghazi clip because I think Representative Michelle Bachmann really represents the whole Benghazi constituency in the Republican Party, and I'll talk about that a little more maybe after I show the final Benghazi clip here.
It's really clear that the Democrats have tried to sabotage this process from the very beginning. We shouldn't do that.
We don't have the ability to
when
sabotage
we have unanswered questions about 4 people who've died. We've got to get to the bottom of this. This is reality. We have to get to the bottom of this and not
the bottom that we have to get to.
And unfortunately, that's what's been happening with the Democrats.
To bring the perpetrators
they have been politicizing, and that's wrong. That's wrong to do about people who've died.
Let me move the two of you on.
Yeah, and it kind of got worse from there in terms of the Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Republican Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann kind of arguing with each other and talking over each other to the point where it wasn't really intelligible, I didn't think, but that is really all the coverage I want to give to Benghazi. It's probably more than it deserves, but there were actual developments, political developments, if not real news developments. I did a little Benghazi coverage last week of the Ben Rhodes email that surfaced, and looks like I'll be covering Benghazi for the foreseeable future, though hopefully not every week. But one issue that seems to be coming up most weeks is the 2016 presidential campaign, believe it or not, even though we haven't even finished the midterm elections that'll be coming up in November 2014, later this year. But I want to show a few clips from Elizabeth Warren, which is one of the few people who is talked about as someone who might run as a Democrat for president in 2016, other than Hillary Clinton, although she's denied it over and over again. And I showed some clips from her, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, I think, because she's on this book tour. And so she was over on Face the Nation on her book tour, and she was talking in ways that might prepare her for a presidential run, especially as a populist, about how the system is rigged against the middle class is basically the big talking point in her book. And I think it would be useful for both a presidential run or maybe even a vice presidential run. The more I watch her, the more I think she might be running to be Hillary Clinton's vice president, which that would be kind of interesting to have two women running as president and vice president. But first, anyway, here's her big talking point on the system being rigged that I'll talk about a little more after I show that clip here.
So as I talk about in my book, what I really see, this is a first-hand account in the book. It's kind of the eyewitness from going to Washington in different fights along the way, always running in to the moneyed interest, so that Washington works for anyone who can hire an army of lobbyists and lawyers. It just doesn't work for regular families. So what I think that's going to have to be about is they've got the concentration of money and power that makes sure that every rule works for those who are rich. What we have on the other side is we only got two things. We've got our voices and we've got our votes. And we've got to make sure we get heard. That's the only way we ever get a level playing field.
We've got it.
So I think that Elizabeth Warren does have an important issue there, and I do agree that the middle class doesn't have the army of lobbyists and the money for our system that does have too much influence for money. I actually have made some statements that a lot of people on the left don't like about campaign finance reform, because I don't agree on certain expenditure limits, but that doesn't mean that I don't think there's a problem with money in politics. And I agree with Elizabeth Warren that the system is rigged for the rich. And one of the ways to fight that is with a public financing system for our campaigns. And you don't need expenditure limits to have a public financing system. And anyway, I just wanted to make that point real quick before I move on to her next clip on Face the Nation that I think shows one of the reasons she's so popular with so many people is because she's not afraid to criticize both Democrats and Republicans. I like to call this clip a plague on both your presidents. That's what she's kind of saying, and I'll discuss that a little more after I show the clip here.
As I make clear in the book, I have had very strong and frankly pretty public disagreements with both the Bush administration and with the current administration, particularly during the financial bailout over the treatment of the biggest banks. My view was there was too much, and still is, too much tilting the playing field in their favor. But I also want to say on this, we always have to remember, I got out there and fought for the idea of a little Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Idea behind it was that credit card companies and mortgage companies shouldn't be able to cheat ordinary families. Do you know who stood up for that? It was President Obama.
Let me...
So yeah, even though she started off that clip as kind of saying a plague on both your presidents, that she has criticized both administrations, she did end up saying something positive about President Obama, and there's no doubt that she's a Democrat. And I think in this next clip she talks about why there is a difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and this clip is actually, you can watch the whole interview by clicking on a link down in the video description, and by the end she sounds even more like she's running to be vice president or maybe preparing a presidential run. But given the circumstances, I think she actually is preparing to be vice president, and you can kind of hear some of the talking points, the pro-democratic talking points that she would use in either of those roles in this final Elizabeth Warren clip I want to show you here.
as I make
very
clear,
good chance the Republicans are going to take back the Senate.
Well, I'm going to be out there fighting that. I'll tell you that, because I know which side, which party stands with American families, stands with America's middle class, who wants to give the middle class a fair shot. And so I'm going to be out there doing everything I can for the Democratic candidates. We've got good people in the United States Senate. We've tried to move something forward. Take a look at the House if you want to see what happens when Republicans take over. What are they on now? Is this their 50th vote to repeal Obamacare? That's not how you run a country. We have real issues we need to deal with. Minimum wage, student loan debt, equal pay for equal work, little accountability for the big financial institutions.
So yeah, I really like the way Elizabeth Warren listed those issues there at the end, and the Democratic issues. And like I said, if you watch the full interview, which you can see by clicking on the Face the Nation link down in the video description, she actually pounds those issues even harder, sounding almost like a vice presidential candidate should sound, I guess. And there's another clip that I didn't show where Bob Schieffer asks her if she's endorsing Hillary Clinton, even though she's not running for president. She again says she's not running for president. She isn't endorsing Hillary Clinton. She says that we're not there yet, and I think she may be holding out to make sure that Hillary Clinton takes up some of these populist issues before she'll be willing to endorse her for what her endorsement's worth. And I think her endorsement is worth something on the left side of the Democratic Party. That's my political analysis for what it's worth. Anyway, and before I get to your comments down in the live comment section, I want to show two more clips having to do with the 2016 presidential campaign, and they're from another possible presidential contender, this time on the Republican side, Senator Marco Rubio. And as long as we're talking about Marco Rubio, do a quick little Marco Rubio there. And I'm going to show you a clip where this is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where reporter Jonathan Karl gets Marco Rubio to say, and this is something I think he'd said before, that if he runs for president, he's actually not going to run for re-election as a senator, so it'll be sort of an all-out, all-or-nothing campaign, as I will talk about a little more after I show that clip here.
The Senate. If I decide to run for president, I will not have some sort of exit strategy to run for the Senate. So that will be a decision not to run for re-election. I believe that if you want to be president of the United States, you run for president. It's all or nothing. You don't run for president with some eject button in the cockpit that allows you to go on an exit ramp if it doesn't work out. Do you think?
So that'll be interesting if Marco Rubio does run for president, because that'll be an all-or-nothing thing, and his prospects aren't looking as good as they did a while back. That a clip I'm not showing from that interview is they showed his drop in popularity, and they asked him if they thought it was because he came out for immigration with a path for the Senate immigration bill that included a path to citizenship, which he's since kind of come out against his own bill, and I think that may be one of the reasons his popularity's dropped in the Republican Party, and now he's trying to seem more right-wing and extreme on some issues. And the final clip I want to show for the Liberal Viewer Sunday Live clip roundup for tonight is a clip of Marco Rubio going as far right as he possibly can, it seems, on the issue of climate change, which is a little disturbing for those of us who think that climate change is an important issue, but it's not surprising for someone who is planning possibly on running in Republican primaries that Marco Rubio would answer questions about climate change like this.
The country. Miami, Tampa are two of the cities that are most threatened by climate change. So putting aside your disagreement with what to do about it, do you agree with the science on this? I mean, how big a threat is climate change? Yeah, I don't agree with the notion that some are putting out there, including scientists, that somehow there are actions we can take today that would actually have an impact on what's happening in our climate. Our climate is always changing. And what they have chosen to do is take a handful of decades of research and say that this is now evidence of a longer-term trend that's directly and almost solely attributable to man-made activity. I do not agree with that. I don't know of any era in world history where the climate has been stable. Climate is always evolving, and natural disasters have always existed. But let me get this straight. You do not think that human activity, the production of CO2, has caused warming to our planet? I do not believe that human activity is causing these dramatic changes to our climate the
way these scientists are portraying it. That's what I do not, and I do not believe that the laws that they propose we pass will do anything about it, except it will destroy our economy.
So that was a little sad, although not surprising, that a Republican who may be running for president and therefore going through the Republican primaries would say that there is no human contribution to climate change. And well, you saw what he said. I don't have to summarize it all for you, but I wanted to show it to you so you could see what it is that Republicans consider to be the facts on climate change, or at least Republicans who are hoping to get a nomination at the national level. And now I'm going to go and look in the comments section and try to get a little bit of live discussion going, or reply to some of your live comments, because I notice I've had about 90 viewers for most of the program, and I want to honor that. But it's been about an hour and 5 minutes already, so I do want to try to finish up the show pretty soon, not go as long as I have for the last several weeks, because I don't think that's useful for anyone really. But let's see. I'll scroll back down to the bottom. I notice you are like arguing with each other, which makes it very difficult for me to... Oh, Murkoff says, a little less grinning about this would be nice, LV. Watch your tone. I'm not sure which topic I was talking about, but, you know, I showed jokes about kidnapped Nigerian schoolgirls. I showed jokes about Vladimir Putin and the Ukraine. So I guess, I don't know. I have kind of a darker sense of humor, I have to admit. So sometimes I find myself smiling and joking about things that are... in a non-humorous context, very serious. Or so I'm sorry if I was smiling about things that are serious and scary, and that is... I'm not going to deny that sometimes happens, but that's what happens when you mix political comedy in with the real political clips. Let's see. NO8549 asks, LV, do you have an NSA t-shirt on? No, this is an Electronic Frontier Foundation t-shirt. It does say National Security Agency, but you see it has an eagle with headphones on and says all your data, and then on the back, which I'm not going to turn around, it says stop the NSA from listening. So this is actually an Electronic Frontier Foundation t-shirt. That's supposed to be stopping NSA spying. But yeah, there is an NSA logo on the front of my t-shirt. Let me scroll through here real quickly and see if I can... And I did do those NSA spying clips. And NO8549 asked about that. How much longer is Snowden going to be able to stay in Russia? I think that he got a 1-year asylum from Putin that was extendable. I don't know exactly. It's pretty much at the whim of Vladimir Putin, I think, is the answer to that. But let me see if I can get a couple other on-topic comments between all you people arguing with each other here. Joseph Luderbach says, how does Bachmann get airtime? Well, she can say provocative things, and she's a congressman from Minnesota, although she's retiring. So, and Blue Goop says, I miss Bachmann, she was fun, and that may be why people think that she's fun, and she draws viewers. Some people thought she was going to be the next Sarah Palin, but I don't know why. And she did try to run for president at one point, but that didn't work out for her. So, let me see if I can take one or two more quick comments before I finish up the show. I see people are arguing about whether Elizabeth Warren is an outsider. Holy City 2012 says she isn't in Washington. She is a state senator. NO8549, she's a senator from Massachusetts. I see I guess she's she is a controversial figure, apparently. So, let's see. Oh, Zoo Qifei. I don't know how to pronounce that. Zoo Kaifel. It looks like Chinese almost. I'm scared about this Republican approach. That must be the climate change in that last clip I showed. So, and then asking what's Democrats' stand on climate change for the most part. Well, they at least believe it exists and that human beings can contribute to it through the production of carbon emissions. So I hope that even if you don't even get into the policies, that you would prefer Democrats over Republicans just on that issue, that they admit that human-caused climate change is a reality like 90-something% of all scientists. So I guess that's the last question I'm going to take. I did finally create that edited, produced video on the Fox News story about the Mount Soledad cross. Is called like Fox News : huge Christian cross is not religious ? And you should definitely go watch that if you haven't seen it. And I appreciate all of you joining me for Liberal Viewer Sunday live clip roundup, which I do at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time every Sunday. I thank you for joining me on Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to everyone. I noticed I showed at least one clip of Xavier Becerra saying Happy Mother's Day, and that was a big topic on the shows that I didn't really show any clips on, but I hope that I started your week or ended your weekend or started your week as a little bit more informed, depending on if you're here in North America, for my U.S. and Canadian and Mexican and maybe South American viewers. Not sure I've seen any of those, but I know I also have viewers in Europe and New Zealand and Australia and even in Africa and Ethiopia that watch the show at the beginning of the week and through the week, and I appreciate all of you supporting me by giving the show a thumbs up and adding your comments and letting me know what you think. And I'll see you next week at 6:30 p.m. Pacific, and I guess I'll be seeing you all around the internet.